All right, thank you for joining me on this episode of The Gospel Truth. I'm your host, Marlon Wilson, and we have an exciting show today, as usual. If you kept me last time, I was on here with Mr. Todd Williams from the Beer and Bible Consistorium, and he came on and dropped some knowledge on how they prepare and do their thing over at the Bible Beer, and how that is an evangelistic tool that they're able to have these events at bars throughout the state of Texas, and it's always an amazing thing when I bring those guests on. But today, I have another debate, and this should be a good and exciting debate, an informative debate. And as always on the Gospel Truth, we are engaging the culture of Christian truth, and with that, we do that through interviews, we do that through debates, and we do that through biblical lessons. And when we do these things, I desire for you guys to go ahead and share it. I would like you guys to go ahead and put that information out there, because that's important to me. That's important to be able to put this information out there and be able to spread the gospel through this media that God has blessed us with, to use it for his glory. And so with that said, if you can take time to go ahead and share it, if you can go ahead and like and follow on the Gospel Truth on Facebook, and also if you can go ahead and subscribe on YouTube. And don't forget, I just recently put all my content on podcasts. So now we're on iTunes, we're on Google Play, we're on Stitcher, we're on Spotify, and I forget the other one, but we're on pretty much every podcast platform that people mostly use. So if you could take time to go ahead and subscribe there, and if you're a person on the go, that should be perfect for your situation, to be able to listen to the debates on the go. But with that said, before I bring in my guests, Mr. Alex D. and Mark Stanley, I'm going to go ahead and go over some upcoming dates, upcoming debates and shows I have coming up. On November 20th, I have Dr. George Yancey, which is tomorrow at 6 p.m., and we're going to be discussing discrimination against Christians in academia. November 23rd, Will Duffy versus C.J. Barnes, and that's coming this Saturday, and that's going to be at 6 p.m. Actually, I think it's 5 p.m. I think I made a mistake. 5 p.m., and they're going to be debating, is open theism biblical? November 27th, I have Daniel Akei versus Anthony Silverstone, and they're going to be at 6 p.m. They're going to be debating young earth creation and morality in the Bible. So that's going to be a pretty lengthy one. So you better get your cup of coffee and kick your feet up for that one. And November 29th, I have David Powellman versus David Lewis, the Battle of the Davids, at 6 p.m. And they're going to be debating, is Calvinism true? So we have a whole plethora of debates coming up. This is just the next 4 shows. I have a whole bunch of stuff coming up, so be on the lookout for all that. And once again, if you need updates, if you want to know all the upcoming shows, you can just once again go visit my YouTube page, and you'll see all the updates there. And once again, while you're there, go ahead and subscribe. But with that said, I'm gonna bring in Alex D. and Mark Stanley, and I'm gonna let you guys introduce themselves. I met Alex through the debate I hosted with Jenna Belk and Scarlett Clay, and he was on there chiming in and everything. And I said, hey, Alex, man, you want to come on? And he was all like, yeah, I'll take that invite. And I put out an invite, I think Apologetic Academy, I believe, where Mark Stanley responded to the invite. And that's how I connected with both of these two individuals. But with that said, I'm going to bring both of you guys in. I'm going to let you guys introduce themselves. What's up, fellas?
Hey.
Hello.
How's it going? How y'all feeling?
Oh, my headphones are bright.
Thank you guys for coming on. I appreciate you both.
Yeah, thank you.
All right. So with that said, I'm going to go ahead and let Alex D. go ahead and give a quick introduction of yourself.
Okay, well, my name is Alex Dalsvoice. The D stands for Dalsvoice. I just go by Alex D because, wow, that's so much easier to remember. I've been atheist for pretty much as long as I can remember, but I tried. My parents were both Catholic. They raised me up Catholic. I never got confirmed in Catholicism. I can go over that in my opening a little bit more. I am married for 8, 9, something like that years. Thank you, Facebook, for reminding me. Live in Cincinnati, Ohio. I work as an aquatics technician. When I'm not working as an aquatics technician, I'm playing a lot of video games. And I'm trying to keep up on the latest atheist propaganda. It's a lot of fun to watch that on YouTube. That pretty much does it for me.
All right. Thank you. All right, Mark, go ahead and give a quick introduction.
Okay. Thanks, Marlon. My name is Mark Stanley. I am the president and founder of Well Read Christian. which is primarily a podcast and blog dedicated to the exploration of worldview through literature and philosophy. So I spend most of my time reading classic works of literature and philosophy and explaining them and thinking about them and comparing them to the Christian worldview and other worldviews, and trying to extract really good content and valuable information from them, and hopefully facilitate interesting discussions. You can find more about the podcast on wellreadchristian.com. There's also a blog. I and others write articles and things there. So yeah, that's basically it. I guess a little bit about me personally. I've been married for a couple of years, and yeah, I graduated from the Master's University with a degree in Bible. I'm a student of Biola now. That's it.
All right. Cool. Thank you both for once again coming in. And as always, when we get on here, man, we like to keep everything kosher, have good conversation, keep it cool, collected, So once again, thank you guys.
Yeah, thank you.
All right. So with that said, we're going to go ahead and get to this format real quick. So it'll be a 10-minute opening statement. Then we're going to have a 60-minute cross-examination where both parties get 3 10-minute opportunities to ask questions. After that, we'll have a 10-minute closing, and then hopefully we'll have some Q&A at the end. Everybody good with that?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
All right. Sounds good. So first up, Mr. Mark Stanley, you got it, man.
All right. Thank you. So as anyone who's tuned in at this point has probably noticed, the debate topic is very broad. And Alex and I were able to talk about the debate topic before we agreed to it, obviously. And we intentionally made it as broad as possible, because what we both wanted was to make sure that our ideas came out rather than just the ideas of the greats. Obviously, a debate like this, or about the existence of God, has been going for a very, very long time. And so it's hard to come up with an original thought. But what we wanted is not just originality, but what we wanted is really us. You can find debates of way more intelligent people with way better credentials. They're out there. But if you're watching this debate, hopefully you're looking at someone who are amateurs. You're looking at people who these ideas affect their daily lives, and they really care about them. And so they're willing to come on to the internet and talk about them. So hopefully most of my ideas are not original. And when I say that, what I mean is that if it was an original idea, it's probably not very good, because there's not many original ideas that are very good anymore. So when I'm defending my own Christian faith, I hope to do so in a way that is thoughtful, but also in a way that's classical and generic in the best sense of the term. And with this topic of why I'm not a Christian, the implicit conflict is whether Christianity is true, whether Christianity is reasonable, whether a person ought to be a Christian or not, based on the facts or the evidence or what have you. And so when I come to the question why I am a Christian, the question that I ask myself, and the question that I asked myself when I was preparing for the debate, is which worldview best captures reality? And when I say that, what I mean is that I know that my opponent is an atheist, and I say opponent loosely because at this point we've had many good conversations, and I don't view him as an adversary. When I say which worldview best captures reality, what I mean is which worldview, which set of ideas, which religion, which philosophy can best characterize the phenomena we experience in the world and the phenomena we experience within ourselves. And so when I was preparing the debate, I was very conscious about Alex's atheism. And the reason for that is that there are incalculable reasons why one could or should be a Christian. There are psychological reasons, there are existential reasons, there are rational reasons, there are logical reasons, there are historical reasons. It might just be that your parents were Christian and that's how you were raised, and so that's the end of the story. And despite however many reasons there could be to be a Christian, I am actually trying to approach the conversation assuming that we can look at the evidence, look at the universe as we find it, and use our reason and our senses in order to detect things and to know things that are actually true, that should lead us to a creator who loves us and who sent his son to die for us, and all those kinds of things. So that being said, I'm going to try to gear my opening statement and really the whole debate towards the question of whether God exists or not. And then I'm hopefully going to branch out from there into the reasonableness of Christianity. But I want you to know that that's intentional. And the reason for that is because if I was debating a Muslim, this would be a very, very different debate. If I was debating a Jehovah's Witness, this would be a very, very different debate. And so even though the debate topic is technically why I am or why I am not a Christian, I'm going to come forward with the knowledge that my opponent is an atheist, and therefore try to prove the reasonableness and even the knowledge that we can have of God based on the facts we discover in the universe. And so I have 10 arguments. There's no way I can get through all of them. That'll be a minute an argument, which is pretty ridiculous. So I'm just going to hit the ones that are my favorites, and then I'll just kind of mention the later ones as we go on. And I don't really see a good way to keep track of my time. I should have started a watch. So Marlon, please feel free to just jump in and be like, "Hey man, you're a minute over," or "You're done in 10 seconds," or whatever you need to do. But I'll try to keep it short. So the first argument is the Kalam cosmological argument. And if you're listening to this stream or YouTube video or whatever, I'm sure you're familiar with it at this point. And it basically goes like this. Premise 1, everything that begins to exist has a cause. Premise 2, the universe began to exist. Conclusion, the universe has a cause. And the reason this argument is so rock solid is because each of the premises seem pretty much unassailable. And so the conclusion that God exists seems pretty much unavoidable. Premise 1, everything that begins to exist has a cause. The only way to deny that is to pretty much deny the cause and effect relationship, in which case you're unraveling logic and certainly science at the core. Premise 2, the universe began to exist. This premise is very, very challenging to refute in the modern day because of Big Bang cosmology. Ever since Einstein developed the general theory of relativity, demonstrating the codependence of space, time, and matter, and the discovery of Edwin Hubble about the red shift, which demonstrates the expanding universe. So you can rewind the clock and show that it comes to a specific point. And then, of course, the discovery by Penzias and Wilson of literally the background radiation, which is the muzzle fire, for lack of a better term, of the Big Bang. You can actually detect the light and the heat that is left over from the Big Bang. The universe has stretched it to be very, very thin, but if you have certain instruments, you can detect it. And then in 1989, NASA launched a satellite called COBE to measure that. And what they actually found is that not only did the Big Bang occur in a way that the energy and heat and light is distributed in the sense that you can rewind the clock and identify a beginning point, but also that it exploded with such accuracy that within 1 to 100,000th of a degree, you can identify that the explosion was such that if it was 1 to 100,000th of a power larger, then no galaxies could have formed. But if it was 1/100,000th of a degree smaller, then the universe would immediately have collapsed back in on itself. And so the project head, George Smoot, said, quote, "If you're religious, it's like looking at God," end quote. And the University of Chicago astrophysicist Michael Turner said, quote, "The significance of this discovery cannot be overstated. They have found the holy grail of cosmology," end quote. And others like Stephen Hawking have called this discovery the most important of the century, perhaps of all time. And so, in the words of Robert Jastrow, who's an astronomer and physicist, he says, quote, "What is the ultimate solution to the origin of the universe? The answers provided by astronomers are disconcerting and remarkable. Most remarkable of all is the fact that in science, as in the Bible, the world begins with an act of creation," end quote. And so this kind of leads me to my next argument, which is the teleological argument. Another classical argument basically goes like this. If the universe is finely tuned, then it has been designed. The universe is finely tuned. Therefore, the universe has been designed. We basically come to this conclusion, and I find this argument just by looking at the universe as it sits. There are so many infinitesimally small factors that lead to a life-permitting universe and life on this planet that it's absolutely ridiculous. Astrophysicist Hugh Ross says that of all the 122 constants that would have had to fall together by chance to create a life-sustaining planet in our universe, assuming there are 10 to the 22nd power of planets in the universe, is still a 1 in 10 to the 138th power of a chance that any life could have arisen at all, that any planet could have arisen with life-sustaining properties. And that's not even getting into the problem of abiogenesis or anything like that. So basically, this argument looks at the universe and says there's absolutely no way this could have happened by chance. There's also the argument from objective morality, where we look at the universe and we can detect that there are universal values and duties that seem to be proven beyond the standard of just human logic. And when you get beyond that, you find that there has to be a power above ourselves in order to ground that. Moving quickly along, I also have the transcendental argument, which basically argues that the only way for two minds to be able to have an intelligible conversation is to assume the foundations of the fact that there are other minds and that logic does work and that communication is effective. And that it only makes sense on a theistic worldview. I also have the argument from consciousness. The mind-body problem suggests a material and an immaterial understanding of reality, and any other understanding would be insufficient. I also have the experience of beauty. I think that if you look into the universe at all, you have to see that there's art, there's beauty. If you just go outside tonight, it's about 7 o'clock, might not be late enough, but if you looked up, you would see unfathomable beauty. And I would argue that art implies an artist. And so if you appreciate nature, what you're appreciating is a piece of art. You don't appreciate things that aren't art. And so if you're appreciating the cosmos, if you appreciate nature, you're appreciating the work of an artist. Argument number 7 is the longing for purpose, meaning, and significance. C.S. Lewis has aptly pointed out that you don't long for things that don't exist. And so if you're longing for purpose, it makes no sense unless purpose actually existed in an abstract and almost Platonic sense. And then, of course, the prophecies and reliability of Scripture, I think, are sufficient evidence for the existence of a divine author. The ministry and resurrection of Jesus, obviously, is a classic. I'm a Christian after all, don't you know? And really, I just think that Christianity resonates with our deepest intuitions. And one more thing, I don't know if I'm running low on time, and if I am, this is the last thing I'll say. And that's that as I was preparing all these arguments, really what I found is that the best argument for God's existence is not a deduction. It's not that we look into the universe and can deduce certain things. And I think that's true. And I think it's important. And I'm here to hopefully illuminate the fact that we can do that. However, I found in my studies and just reflecting on why I really am a Christian, I found that I'm not a Christian because of these arguments. I'm a Christian because Sergei Rachmaninoff. I'm a Christian. He's a Russian composer, by the way. I'm a Christian because of the Psalms, because of the Sermon on the Mount, because I've eaten really, really good food, because I look at my wife and I see beauty, and I am convinced beyond the shadow of a doubt that there must be more to the universe than just matter and motion. And I think the alternative is crude and evil and repulsive and boring. And I have to admit that the logical arguments just pan in comparison of the basic experience of life that I think we all can enjoy. At the end of the day, I'm a Christian because I cannot help it. It's because I wake up every single day and cannot help but be thankful. And who am I thankful to? You can't be thankful to nothing. I listen to music and it's so beautiful. I see the color in the trees, or the purring of a cat, and the smile of my beautiful wife. I see the beauty and the majesty and the goodness of God every single day, and I find it absolutely undeniable. And you can't explain that on an atheistic worldview. You just can't. You cannot explain the goodness of the world. And if God didn't exist, I couldn't cope with some of the evil in the world also. And so I'll end with a quote from C.S. Lewis. He said famously, quote, "I believe in Christianity as I believe that the sun has risen, not only because I see it, but because by it I see everything else," end quote.
All right. Thank you so much for that open statement, Mark Stanley. Appreciate you. All right, Alex, you got it, man.
All right. Thank you. So when we were talking about this, like Mark said, we talked about this debate topic before we got here, and we settled on this more conversation style, why I'm Christian, why I'm not Christian. And at first, the first conversation that we had about this was, why am I Christian versus why am I atheist? But now it's a slightly different question. I think that deserves to be looked at. Why am I Christian? Why am I not Christian? So I think the best way to answer that is to go back into my past and see what my explorations were. Now, I grew up in a Catholic household. My parents were both Catholic, and we went to church often enough. But my real story on this starts when I was about 15 years old. We're getting up to the rite of, in Catholicism, there's a rite of confirmation. And during this time, I started really studying, hey, what is this whole Catholicism thing about? Okay. And I came up with a lot of questions. And my youth minister was not the most adept at coming up with answers. And one of the big questions that I had, this is my first foray into theology and looking at the Bible and everything. We started figuring out, okay, this whole transubstantiation thing, is this real? Are we really eating body and blood of Jesus Christ? I don't know. So my cousin came over and we looked through all the Gospels to find any reference we could. Another cousin joined us and he said, "Hello, fellow theologians. What are we looking at here?" That's where it started. And based on that, I couldn't come up with an answer. And because I couldn't come up with one consistent answer, yes or no, because of how vague the entries are, I said, you know what? I'm sorry. I can't go through with this rite of confirmation. There are a lot of people who are taking this seriously. And out of respect for them, I don't want to put myself in the middle of a ceremony that I'm just kind of halfway going through. For the sake of the people who are truly doing this. But it didn't stop there because I wanted to keep looking, okay? Not knowing, saying I don't know to me is the start of a conversation. It's never the end. Of course, there are a lot of things that you don't know about, but you don't settle on, I don't know, let's move on to something else. It's, I don't know, now let's figure it out. So I spent a number of years actually trying to really figure out religion, trying to figure out, most importantly, the Bible. And they'll tell you, the people in the atheist community will tell you the fastest way to make an atheist is to have someone read the Bible, right? And that's what happened to me. After going through it, and after learning the history, and after going through myself and seeing that they can't even make it 2 chapters without some pretty severe contradictions, it's like, well, they got to get this act together, all right? And so if you want to ask why I'm atheist, number one reason would be that a plain reading of the Bible is not enough to establish a theology. You can get a lot of great ideas. There's a lot of good wisdom in there, and there's a lot of contradictory wisdom in there. And so it's very, very difficult. I would say almost impossible to look at this one book for source material and say, okay, now I know what we're supposed to do. Now I got this morality pegged. I got this theology pegged. I know exactly how we're supposed to worship. I know exactly about the nature of God, and we got it. No, there's no way you can do that from a plain reading of the Bible. And I say plain reading because there's going to be a lot of people who they'll look into, let's go ahead and study the language at the time, and let's try to figure out what they really meant when they said certain words. I'm not a language person. I would really just have to take their word for it. But that's the problem. When you stop looking at the Bible and then you start having to take someone's word for what the interpretation of the Bible is, suddenly we're not talking about divinity anymore. It's touching humanity. Now we have to take into account the idea, is this person going to be pushing forth their agenda rather than giving an actual talk about God? So to me, it's not, I can't say that I know for a fact that it's incorrect, but there's so much, there's enough I don't know in there that I can't really lean my head on anything on that. And so that did it for me. And that did all my explorations in. And this was, as I say, that did it. I'm talking about like 6 years worth of trying to get the right answers from this and trying to figure it out. Then finally just putting in my head, you know what, this is completely, I can't do it. And other people can, maybe they can, I can't. And the sheer amount of contradictions, the sheer amount of ambiguity in there prevents me from being able to look at that and say, yeah, I can back up what this thing is saying. Now, another thing about me when it comes to Christianity is I never had any real personal experience. And a lot of people are gonna say, you know, it's like yeah, there's the gospel, there's all this, but you know what? I had this one experience that I just can't explain. It was a spiritual moment. I felt something that I could not have explained any other way than by saying God. So maybe I'm lacking in that. I never had it. And anything that I've had that could have been remotely close, I've been able to explain in mundane ways. As far as the other reasons for it, I've never really got into prayer either. Prayer seems to be very contradictory to me. If God already has a will, there's no sense in me asking for anything. Right? The best I can do is be closer to God. And even then, I'm not really getting any meaningful response. So what's this whole prayer for? Prayer never really did. I never grew up in a strongly Christian community. I had pockets of friends who were Christian at the time, but and of course they had their own communities like the Mormons, Mormon church. I had a group of friends who were Mormon, a group of friends who were non-denominational, and a group of friends who were Catholic. But I never really bonded very strongly with that community. So a community of people going to church. I never had that. I was mostly alone growing up, and even though my family was mostly Catholic, Catholicism was never really a big part of me growing up. Now, the other 3 reasons that I want to talk about why I choose this particular leaning is because all, and I do mean all, logical arguments for God that I've ever heard fail to actually prove God. There's always something that's missing, either an invalid conclusion or some other sort of logical fallacy, or even in the worst case, and this is point number 2, even if we were to grant every single one of those arguments, we still have no idea if it's all the same God. Now, I'm sure some people here are familiar with the Hovind 6, right? Like the 6 things that Hovind says. what is it? Abiogenesis, cosmology, macroevolution. Goodness, I forget all the other ones. All right, but even if all 6 of those things were caused by something that was divine in nature, we still don't know that it was all the same one. So it doesn't reach a conclusion. The Leibniz cosmological argument, all that leads to is a non-contingent being. Okay, that tells us nothing about the non-contingent being, and it doesn't tell us, that he had a son who went to Earth a couple thousand years ago and did a couple of things. We have no reason to look at all that and say, okay, they must be the same God. Okay. And the other thing that made this interesting for me about the God concept is that if you look at the history of scientific discovery, and this happens even now, you will see that a lot of things are discovered concurrently from people who were not working together and had no reason to talk to each other and no possible way of talking to each other, yet somehow they're coming up with the same conclusions, right? The Pythagorean theorem, they found this out all over the world without any central consensus point on it. We call it the Pythagorean theorem because that's where we popularized from. But other cultures figured it out. Other cultures figured out metallurgy. Other cultures figured out astronomy. Other cultures figured out agriculture. My personal favorite is that everyone figured out alcohol. Every culture figured out how to distill alcohol, right? But what is unique to a culture is things like their philosophy or their culture or their art. And if you compare religious beliefs and the way that religious beliefs spread, it is much more in common with how philosophical beliefs spread. You can actually trace back, for example, philosophy, and you can see, okay, this was the origination of this type of philosophy, this line of thinking, this way of looking at the world. It started from this source. This was the student who brought it to this university or who brought it here. You can trace it forward, and then you can trace it back also. Language works like this also. But what you never see with language and what you never see with religion also is you don't see this exact same language. You don't see Italian popping up in the middle of China just suddenly and spontaneously. And likewise, I would like to think that if a religious truth was really true, you would discover it the same way you would discover any other truth. But you don't see that. You don't see Christianity just popping up in the middle of a place where it's never been before out of nothing more than personal revelation. So just to wrap all this up, I don't want to say that there is no God. I just don't have enough information. And based on the fact that I don't have enough information and the information I do have doesn't lead to a satisfactory conclusion, this isn't something I can lean my hat on. It might be. I can't really say for sure. But until we get a couple of other things to line up and a couple of things understood and more consensus, I can't do it. So the reason I'm atheist is because I don't have a consistent story of Christianity to even say, yeah, okay, that's something that I can believe. Thank you.
All right. Thank you both for the opening statements. I think everyone understands your positions perfectly. At this time, we'll be going to the 60-minute cross-examination. Mark Stanley, it is your turn for your first 10-minute cross-examination of Alex D.
Great. So that's interesting that you point out that the history of religious belief supposedly demonstrates kind of a naturalistic origin, because unlike science, the philosophy of religion across cultures produces confusion and variety rather than clarity and objectivity. But I'm nervous for this point, though, because it seems like you might be making the genetic fallacy, which is to say that since you can identify the origin of a belief, then you can thereby disprove that belief. And I'm sure that if I dismissed Darwinian evolution because I could trace the formation of the belief down to Darwin, I think you would have a problem with that, and rightly so. And furthermore, I think I would encourage you to put this argument into a syllogism, because if you do, I think you'll see that it's just not really that great of an argument, frankly. The fact seems to me that even if there are multiple different religions, it actually says nothing about the truth or the falsehood of that religion. Every single culture could come up with their own religion, and it wouldn't prove that any of those religions are false. Just in the same way that if every single culture came up with their own way of making metal that was completely different, it wouldn't prove that any of those ways of making metal were false in some sense. It's just not how the truth or falsehood of a belief could be established. So it seems to me like your argument is basically this: if God existed, there would need to be one religion. Do you think that's a fair characterization?
I think that if there was one God, and I knew you were going to pick on this because this is like I knew coming up. It's like I've never heard this anywhere. So either it's so simple to debunk that nobody bothers to bring it up, or it's so novel that I am like groundbreaking. I refuse to believe it's the second one. So if I were to say that, like, I think it's possible to have something with so much vagueness to it. Like we can we can find some aspect of something. Of course, we don't have full knowledge of it. History is my favorite because you can look back and say, okay, this thing happened in history, but then you still need to construct some other stuff around it, right? So it does make some sense to me that even if there was a religious truth out there and we are only able to suss out like a certain aspect of it, that yeah, okay, we start with that one conclusion, then we can build from there, and everybody's going to come up with their own different conclusions. Okay, just like metallurgy, you're not going to find the same construction materials everywhere, so obviously everybody's going to come up all these different what do you call it? All these different in ancient cultures are going to come up with different ways of refining the minerals that they happen to have around them. So if I were to say we would have come up with one truth, I think we would have at least found something that everyone can hang their hat on. And I think you mentioned something when you were giving your opening about this like universal sense of longing or purpose or sense of beauty. And I'm going to ask you about that. That's like number 3 on my things to ask about. But I would like to think that at least all of them have something in common that they all build off of.
Well, that's so funny that you say that, because I kind of had a little bit of an aha moment.
Mm-hmm.
Every culture generally, I can't think of a culture that doesn't believe in the supernatural. And so when you were saying that every culture came up, with the Pythagorean theorem on their own, it's like, well, every culture also has their own deity. So anyway, for this argument to work, you're going to have to demonstrate that if God exists, there ought to only be one religion. I think that's the only way to make this argument work. And that's a pretty heavy burden of proof to bear.
Okay, see, but now I guess where I'm coming from with this is I'm not trying to prove that all religions are false. I'm trying to say this is why I'm not Christian. I can't hang my hat on this because we haven't shown that this is it. Let me go back on this. Yeah, you're right. Every culture has come up with some kind of spirituality or other, and that I would say is because we're explanation finding creatures. We're explanation finding people. And they're going to come up with whatever reason seems to fit at the time. So the common element that I see is come up with an answer. Not necessarily the truth of the answer, but they're going to come up with an answer, because I'm sure that other civilizations have come up with answers that you don't agree with. And I don't agree with them also. So I guess I wouldn't want to say that they all have to have the same belief, but it has to be more than just we're looking for it. And we're going to look to a divine source for it. Because, yeah, you're right. Everybody is appealing to things that they have never heard of. Must be something bigger than us.
Well,
sorry, go ahead.
No, it's okay. I'm sorry. I'm interrupting you. The trouble is that your argument is this. Your argument is, well, look at all of the variety and unconformity. Look at how everyone disagrees. Therefore, Christianity, or therefore I'm not a Christian because I can't subscribe to any one of these different views. And what I'm saying is, just because there's a plethora of views doesn't mean that none of them are true or all of them are equally invalid. And so if there is such a thing as criterion that we can use to evaluate truth claims within a religious structure, then you can use those premises in order to further your advancement towards the truth. And of course, I believe that that's my project where I'm doing that. And I'm saying there are good reasons to believe Christianity. And I came up with 10 reasons. 9 of them are logical. One of them was emotional. That was, I don't want to say emotional appeal, because I think it was an existential appeal. But for your argument to work, you will have to demonstrate why every religion has to be equally false, or otherwise that if God existed, he would have to have only one religion. I think that's the only way for this argument to work. And then also you have to explain why every single culture has come up with a supernatural explanation, but you yourself reject one.
No, okay, and let's clear this up too, because I didn't say anything about it in my opening. I'm not necessarily rejecting any supernatural source. If there is a supernatural source, I haven't seen it, but I'm not going to go so far as to say that there isn't one. And when I really wish we could talk about this, and now I know what I'm going to talk to you about in my 10 minutes. But it's like sometimes I feel like that we're evaluating the world with 2 completely different standards of evidence, right? Where you're looking at the same things I am, I'm looking at the same things you are. You're coming to one conclusion, and I'm saying, you know what, that's not enough for me. So, yeah, I can't discount Christianity. I'm not saying, this argument of mine definitively shows that Christianity is no good, not true in any way, because because it traces, you can trace it back, knowledge of this back, like language more. You can trace it back to, no, it's not a knockout argument. This isn't a silver bullet for Christianity, but it's enough that it gives me pause. And it's enough that I look at this and say, yeah, this idea came out the same way that Italian came out. And it's a perfectly good language, and it suits their needs, and it suits them fine. But as far as, is there a universal truth to language? No, every culture just kind of comes up with their own. So
hold on, though. You're falling back to what's literally a textbook definition of a genetic fallacy. You're saying, because I can identify where Christianity came from, because I can trace the source of the belief down to its origination, and even the influences that came into it, therefore that belief is false because, well, it's fabricated. Just look. But that's just not true. I mean, Darwin came up with a theory of evolution from his observations, but you could not disprove his theory by saying, well, Darwin was the first to come up with it, and we know that he was out on a boat and he was looking at these finches. It's like, that doesn't disprove anything.
Yeah, no, so, you're right.
So I just don't see that you're going to get anywhere logically with that objection, even if you've been thinking about it for a long time, and so you kind of like the objection, but it's not going to get you anywhere if you're actually trying to ascertain what the world is like.
No, but the other thing we can do with other discoveries, like, we'll go to Darwin's discoveries, is that someone else can spot check it, right? Now, when it comes to Christianity, when it comes to any supernatural claims, really, I don't see that that's possible. And,
sorry, I was just going to say that I disagree profoundly. I mean, I came up with 9 reasons why I think that there are good reasons to believe in the supernatural, and I hope to be able to talk about them in depth, because the truth is that these are all objective arguments that I'm using that everyone can look at and see and acknowledge. In the same way that Darwin used science in order to try to demonstrate a theory of evolution, I'm trying to use our observable and also our rational capacities to conclude and deduce a supernatural element to the universe.
Okay, and gosh, I wish we could skip ahead, because I just want to get to the different standards for both of us. And you're right, we probably do have 2 different standards. And whereas you can look at this and say, well, this definitely leads to the idea that there's a supernatural, I look at that and say, you know what, not necessarily. And I'm not saying it definitely doesn't. I'm not saying that there's anything that's ever come up that completely rules it out. But I'm saying that there isn't enough, at least for me, to be able to say, yeah, this is a distinct possibility. Not only is it a distinct possibility, but it's the best answer to all of this that's worth devoting the rest of our lives to.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's fine. Yeah. As long as we are on the same page that the evidence that we're looking at is objective. I really don't want to be strawmanned in the sense that you look at me or anyone watching would look at me and go, yeah, he's kind of just fabricating this. It's like, no. It's not religion versus science in the sense that science we can observe and religion we have to just believe on faith. No. Okay. The 9 arguments that I came up with are features of the universe that we can all universally look at. And so it's not that every culture's, has their own different blah, blah, blah. It's like, no, there are things that are universal human experiences and conclusions and premises, and I'm using them to argue for something greaher. And so, without further ado, we can get into some of those arguments more specifically.
Well, I do want to apologize also that I'm not able to, formal logic is well above me. So you asked me to put something into syllogism form, I'm lost. If I had to, I could probably come up with something with the help of about 20 other people. But I couldn't just say, it's like A, therefore B, therefore it must follow that C. I've never really formally studied that.
Sure.
And you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. Sorry.
That's 10 minutes for Mark. All right, Alex, you got 10 minutes to cross-examine Mark.
All right. So let's talk about standards of evidence.
Sounds good.
Okay. Because it seems to me that a lot of people look at the same evidence, right? I see a lot of response videos on YouTube, right? And I see they're talking about the same evidence and they're saying, well, this definitely proves God. And another person's going to come along and says, nope, it doesn't. And it as I watch other things, I watch people talk about prophecy and I watch people talk about evidence for creation. And it seems that the people are just talking right past each other. Where one person is saying, it's like, yeah, look at this. This is it. This is enough. This should be good. And the other person is saying, no, it really isn't. And this isn't exclusive to one side or the other, right? Because a Christian will make a claim, this is definitely it. And an atheist will say, I'm sorry, this isn't definitive proof. And it'll go the other way. It's like an atheist will say, look at all this evidence against that belief, and the Christian will be like, nope, that doesn't do it for me. So what I'm wondering is, are we all, as atheists and Christians, or atheists talk to each other, are we just looking at completely different standards for what would be acceptable for us?
That's a great question. The truth is that I don't think most people are smart enough to think through. Well, okay, let me modify that. It's not that I don't think most people are smart enough. It's that I think they either don't care or they just never have thought about it, of what kind of standard of proof that you should use to approach a question like this, or any question similar to this. I think the truth of the matter is that most people don't care. It's a question of their will rather than a question of the intellect. And so most people go into any of these conversations and they have biases, right? By the time you're 3 years old, you probably have a bias about whether God exists or not. And so the truth is that people go into these conversations with preconceived notions and they interpret the evidence based on that. And so I think the only relevant or real question that should come out of this question is, are we completely bound by our biases? Is the fact that Richard Dawkins is Richard Dawkins, is he just never, ever going to change his mind? And there's no amount of evidence that could persuade him otherwise. That might be the case. I'm persuaded that that's not the case. And my worldview enables me to have that view, even though I am a compatibilist. But my understanding would be that people make their conclusions based off of what they want, and they use their senses in their brain in order to basically use overwhelming confirmation bias with the world. But I do believe that you can overcome that confirmation bias by basically trying, by basically using solid reason, by being cross-examined, by engaging in conversations like the one that we're having right now, and by just trying to use logic and reason and accountability in order to come to some solid conclusions. And I think that that's the best you can hope for, at least.
Okay, so I want to really pin this down a little bit, since we have a little bit of time to do so. Like, one of the things that gets brought up is, like, will atheists, especially ones who are empiricists, or what, I don't know any ists or isms, so forgive me if I use phrases incorrectly, but they're looking for some sort of tangible, I want to be able to touch God. I want to be able to have, be able to interview the 500 witnesses that supposedly saw Christ afterwards, right? Now, we're probably never going to be able to have that in any meaningful way. Okay. And so, but this would go the other way also, right? Because if you look at the Hovind 6, one of them is going to be like, if you want to win the $250,000 prize, which I have no idea if it's still up, but you have to prove things about evolution that, even evolution doesn't claim, right? Like you've heard the phrase crocoduck before, right? It's like even evolution doesn't talk about a cross between a crocodile and an alligator. So in order to disprove creation, they're asking for an impossible standard that not even people who subscribe to evolution are claiming. And I worry that it's going the other way too. Like, I'm asking you for a standard of evidence that is either impossible or doesn't come close to proving what I think we're supposed to try to prove.
Okay, well, I definitely want to step away from Kent Hovind. I grew up when I was very young. I watched cartoons and Kent Hovind, and no, seriously, I'd eat my bowl of Fruit Loops and watch Kent Hovind, and I loved it. But as I got older and started thinking for myself, I want to distance myself from his methodologies, from his personality, and from a lot of his arguments. And so I'm not going to be familiar too much with Kent Hovind and what you're speaking of. However, the question that I do think is worth asking is, what do you think counts as evidence? I have provided 9 pieces of evidence that I think are conclusive. However, I draw the question to you. If those 9 pieces of evidence don't actually point to a supernatural, number one, where do they point? And number two, what would count as evidence?
Okay. Yeah. And I look at this and I look at the, I wrote down, I actually came up with 10 things you talked about. So I probably put in a couple of things in there. But like, you mentioned Kalam, you mentioned the transcendental argument, teleological argument and whatnot. And the conclusion of most of those is that, okay, the universe had a creator. Okay. Even if I grant that, it's like, okay, but we still have no idea, is that a supernatural source? Is that just something that we haven't figured out yet? Like, 200 years ago, radiation would have been supernatural to us. It was there. We just had no way of detecting it or manipulating it. Now we do. It's not like we invented it. It's not like we came up with it. It's just now we have the means to figure it out. And when I think of supernatural, I just think of hasn't been explained yet. Now, that's probably not a definition that would be standard by any means. But I just, it's like as soon as you figure it out, well, all of a sudden what's supernatural is now natural. So when I think of all these arguments, though, the best thing I can come up with is we just haven't figured out what the answer is yet. And I think personally that I don't know is a more responsible answer than, okay, I got it. All these things are the same person and it must be a supernatural source. So to me, those dots haven't been connected in any convincing way. So what would be the best way to convince me that all those dots are connected?
Well, I don't know. I would love to ask you that. I think the dots are pretty clearly paint an arrow. And you mentioned that you think that supernatural explanations wouldn't really be fair because 200 years ago radiation would have been supernatural to us. But that's not really fair, is it? Because radiation is natural, and by definition, the supernatural is supernatural. So the question I think we need to be asking is, does the natural world point to more than just the natural world? And if you look at the creation of the cosmos, if you look at the fine tuning of the cosmos, if you look at the mind body problem, the fact that I'm actually communicating with another soul, with another mind, not just a finely tuned machine that's just kind of operating and running its course like an automaton, but I'm actually talking to a person. If you look at these things, it seems like there's evidence that that there's more going on in the universe than just matter and motion, than just colliding molecules and atoms and particles and such. And so I think that if you're looking at this, it's really not fair to say, well, the supernatural world is just one that we haven't been able to prove yet naturally. And that's like, no. What we're talking about is the creation of the natural world. What we're talking about is space, time, and matter coming into existence at a singular point of time. So by definition, we're talking something that's beyond the natural world. It's just like when atheists begin arguing about the multiverse theory. And, they don't understand that is a metaphysical theory. Because by definition, anything outside of our universe is not in our universe. And so therefore, if you want to argue that there are multiple universes, you're basically arguing, first of all, it's complete speculation that there's no evidence for. And second of all, you're arguing a metaphysical theory that therefore is, under the definition that at least most people use, supernatural.
Okay, so let's pin this down a little bit, because honestly, I can't think of a good definition that would like encompass all the things that I want to and exclude all the things I want to. So what are we looking at as far as like supernatural and natural seems to be antonyms, right? It's like either something is natural or supernatural. It seems like it's a tautology. Okay.
Yeah, they are mutually exclusive.
How would you define what is supernatural then? Would you say that it would the what I got from your statement was beyond this universe?
Yeah, that could be fair. I don't know. I haven't thought about it, to be frank, but okay. I think supernatural could be defined as something that cannot be explained by matter, motion, time, something that is beyond those things, something that does not conform to the laws of physics.
Okay. Okay. I'm trying to take this all in, because honestly, when people say supernatural, like I have no idea what they really mean. And it could mean one of a number of things. One of them is possibly, we just haven't figured it out yet. And if we were to say that supernatural is something that's beyond all this, how would we begin to show that by necessity it was something that is beyond all this, instead of just something that we saw but we haven't understood yet?
Right. Well, that's a great question. So one of the answers to that is that if it's a supernatural explanation, it's one that you could not even in principle test scientifically. You have to be able to understand the bounds of science. And one of the boundaries of science is that science can only test the natural world. And so if you can come up with a theory that's naturalistic, and you could observe, test, repeat that theory to demonstrate that it's true, then by definition, it would be natural. So for example, if we are 500 years ago and we don't know about germs yet, I don't actually know when germs were discovered, but you know the point, then you could say it's a supernatural phenomena, sickness, or you could say, well, what if there are these little microbial things, and it sounds to me like on your definition that would be supernatural, but it's not. That can't be a good definition of supernatural, because it's natural. It's just something you haven't explained yet. And so what I'm trying to say is that supernatural is something that you could never prove naturally in principle, while naturalism or something that is in the natural world is something that you could explain naturally. That is why the cosmological argument necessarily points to something supernatural, because we're talking about something that is outside of space, time, and matter, and therefore is by definition supernatural. Does that make sense?
You know what? I want to come back to that because I've always wanted to know more about the conclusion of Kalam and Leibniz and all that. But I suppose like break this down, because my time's almost up. So break this down for me. Explain, like, never mind, how my time is up.
Yep, time is up. All right, Mark, you got 10 more minutes, man.
Okay, I appreciate that. So, you know what? I want to let you finish.
Okay.
Alex, go ahead. What were you going to say? I'm enjoying the conversation. I don't want to just change topics and push you and ruin where we were.
Okay, I got it. But I want to give you a full, like, your full time. All right?
I appreciate it, but I'm not worried about it. Just okay. So maybe return the favor later. I don't know.
So if I was to have you like explain it like I'm 5, because like when it comes to this stuff, obviously I am. Like, how would we, like, let's say there's this item X, right? Mm-hmm. So how would we know? how would we separate this into piles? Item X is the explanation for item X is supernatural, or the explanation for item X is natural. Like, how would we know what basket that falls into?
Okay. The answer to that is whether the phenomena being described could be explained by naturalistic processes. And when I say that, I mean something that you could observe, test, and repeat, something that the explanation can fully be exhausted in the natural world. And of course, I want to be careful saying fully exhausted, because in any inquiry, it could go infinitely backwards. So in some sense, I think you could use a Leibnizian argument to argue that all cause and effect ultimately has to come back to an ultimate uncaused cause, or an unmoved mover. And I think that would actually be a really great argument for the supernatural, arguing that basically all natural phenomena is an infinite regression of natural phenomena unless you have a bare bones back, unmoved mover, caused, uncaused cause. Does that make sense?
Okay.
But basically, I don't know if this conversation is really going to get us anywhere unless there's a point to it. And I think the point should be the cosmological argument, or all of these arguments, classically the theistic proofs, they demonstrate something about the reality and the supernatural, this X factor, if you will. They demonstrate something that's beyond it. So, for example, the cosmological argument demonstrates that whatever we're talking about, this supernatural being, is all powerful because it created space, time, and matter. So goes the argument. And it's got to be ridiculously intelligent in order to modify everything in order to create life. I mean, just the human brain that we can't even comprehend. What is it? 2 million full Encyclopedia Britannicas are inside each and every one of our brains. I mean, that is the most sophisticated supercomputer that we could ever even dream of. And, it's something baked right into the nature of our experience. So what we have is a God who is all powerful, who's all intelligent, who is an agent. And we know that because if it was some kind of a force or something, forces don't cause things to happen. So it has to be an agent that caused time, because it's only an agent that makes decisions. That's what I'm trying to say. And then, of course, you have the moral argument that gets us to the fact that in our moral experience, we experience objective duties and values that demonstrate that there's something higher than us, that there's something higher than social contract or evolutionary biology that can ground objective morality. And so from those classic theistic proofs, you get an X factor. You get a cause of something and an explanation for something that cannot be explained by naturalistic causes and is therefore supernatural. And then from there, I would readily grant that you can't really get any farther without special revelation. And I'm not afraid of that at all. I think if God exists and if those qualities existed, then we would expect him to speak. And it turns out that if you look at the history of religion, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Moses, people have claimed to speak for God, and seemingly authoritatively and persuasively. And then, of course, it culminates in the life and ministry of Jesus, and then, of course, his resurrection.
Okay. Well, that answers that question. This is a good place to tie this off if you wanted to move on to your 10 minutes.
Sure. That sounds good. I appreciate that. And again, it doesn't have to be exactly 10 minutes. I don't really care. But okay, my cross-examining questions. Here we go. Okay, so let me ask you this. If there is not a foundational, necessary being who is the fabric of reality, the cause of all causes and the unmoved mover, then why is there something instead of nothing?
I think about this too. And the truth is, the best answer I can give you is I don't know. What was it? He was on the show a while ago. What was his name? I forget his name. Anyway, the one of his ideas is, and I kind of like this idea, is that if there was nothing, then there would be never anything that came out of that. And that made a lot of sense to me. It's like nothing necessarily leads to nothing. If you're talking about why did we end up with what we have now, the best answer that I have for that is I don't think that that we were the end result. Right, and there's absolutely no reason to think that we're the intended result for if there was something to kick this whole thing off, and if there was something that was guiding the process. I have no reason to think that I should be arrogant enough to think, you know what, hey, this was all designed for me. This terrarium of universe of which I can only exist on an infinitesimally small part of it, I was the point. It was all for me. So when I think about all that, then I always have to think about the fact that we're a side effect, right? Even if there was an intentional something there, right? Like, okay, maybe something decided to let's kick off a universe right here, right? And it's the settings on that dial, that fine tuning that you were talking about, just happened to create something that was set up for us. But if they were set to something different, then you and I would not be here. And there would be some other Alex D and some other Mark Stanley sitting in that universe saying, you know what, this universe, everything was set just right. Like if the gravitational constant was just a little bit off, then they would have had planets instead of whatever it is that we have now. And they would be saying how wonderful it is that everything was lined up just right to create us. Therefore, we must be the ultimate the purpose for the creation of the universe. And so that's why arguments like that aren't convincing to me, because it's assuming that we're a conclusion. Does that make any sense? Am I missing your question?
No, it does make perfect sense. Although I'm afraid that you just haven't thought of something. So first of all, if one of those constants was off, it's not that there'd be a different universe where people, a different Alex D would be having this conversation. No. If any one of those was off in 1 to the 2 millionth power, which is an unfathomable number considering there's only 10 to the 70th power of atoms in the universe. If one of those was off, there would be no life. There would be no conversation at all. And so it actually looks like the odds of any universe happening, let alone ours, is so infinitesimally small that it's just unfathomable. It's not like, oh, look at this pothole. It's very uniquely this pothole. And if this would have changed, then this would no longer be our pothole. It's like, no. This is a perfect sphere, like perfect. Okay. And another thing that I'm worried about is that you said it's arrogant to say that everything was created for you, and that if we look at the universe and say that we were the end result, then that's kind of arrogant. I smiled a little because I agree with you. I completely agree. It's not about you. It's not about me. It's not about any one of us individually. Humanity is created in order to observe something so much bigger and greater. And the universe exists to display something so much bigger and greater. And so I always just kind of chuckle inside when atheists say this. They say, look, it's so arrogant for you to think the universe is about you. It's like, no, we don't think it's about us. That's the point. The point is that there's something so much greater, and we get to be this little tiny, tiny piece of it. We've been graced and blessed to be able to observe something so much more infinitely beautiful and fantastic that to think that the universe is about us, I agree, is the most egotistical thing that you could possibly think of. Does that make sense?
Okay. So
two things there. One was that if one of those constants is off, we do not have a universe. We don't have an alternate universe. There's no universe. And then secondly, it is arrogant to say that everything was created for you and that I'm the result. No. I am the effect of a being so much greater who is so good and loving and merciful and beautiful that he wants to share that. And so we are the baby little ant that gets to observe something so much greater. It's not about us.
See, now we're going to get back to standard, because like for me, there's not enough to point to that, right? There's not enough to say, all right, the universe, even if we could grant you that, yeah, if any other numbers that were off by any amount, even if they weren't set, it's like, okay, let's say that this was intentionally set, even if we grant you that. Like the other parts of your conclusion don't seem to follow either. It's like, well, here we are. But then how do you connect the dots to, well, it must be because someone else wants us to witness this?
Well, let me connect those dots for you.
Okay.
I have 9 arguments, and I gave them all in my opening speech. So my question for you is, what more do you want, man? I mean, I would very well argue that if God painted it in the sky, I exist, Alex D, believe in me, that you'd be like, wow, Mark is more wealthy than I thought, and he paid for this plane to make a error signal or whatever those things are called. And I really, really want to ask you, what would it take for you to believe, if not the universe as God has created it?
This is the question that comes up, and goodness, if I haven't heard any good answer for it, because I haven't, okay. Because I am not, it's like I'm not studied in astrophysics. I'm not studied in a lot of those other subjects that you'd have to learn about to even begin to suss out this stuff. I don't know. And I don't know enough about like scientific evolution and whatnot. But if we're going to come up with, I should know, or what evidence would be presented to me that would make me say, all right, I definitely should know by now. I would say that if there was a creator, and if there was a creator who created me, and if this creator did want to have a relationship with me, that even if I don't know what kind of evidence I would need, then that creator would, right? And so either that creator is not interested in giving this to me, or this creator is tweaking to me in ways I don't understand, or there is not one. Oh, Marlon's up.
Yep. All right, guys. That's 10 minutes for Mark. All right, Alex, you got 10 minutes, man.
All right, thank you. Goodness, if we aren't still talking past each other again, and I wish we weren't.
I don't think we
because,
are.
No, I know that we're not. Like we're trying to make some sense out of this, right? You're trying to bridge a gap, and I'm trying to bridge a gap, and somehow it's just not happening. And I don't like. I'll be the first to admit, like I don't have a full grasp of everything that exists in the universe, and that's why I leave it as a possibility. I'm not saying that no, definitely you're wrong. I'm just saying that wow, there's still so many possibilities that I can't say you're right. And probably one of the biggest ones, and this is the point that I'm making here, is the intent of whatever it is that created us. Now, you could say something about like Revelation, and that's fine if you've gotten it. I haven't. But like, how do we know that the intent of whatever it is that set all this up for us was our well-being and us, and giving us a sense of awe at their creation? I know you're a beauty person, and I can get that from listening to you talk about Dostoevsky. And I wanted to talk to you about beauty and all that, but where was I going with this? Do you remember where I was going with this?
Yeah.
Yes. Okay.
It sounds like you're basically saying that if God created everything for us, how would we know? And is there a way to be able to differentiate that from if it wasn't the case?
Okay, go with that.
Great. So firstly, I'm going to say that if everything wasn't created for us, I think we wouldn't exist, as evidenced by the teleological argument. We would not exist as conscious minds, even if the physical universe existed, even if against all odds, and I really, really mean all odds, our exact universe existed exactly as we know it. I think consciousness itself is proof that we are here to observe something. And in the same way, if astronauts discovered some kind of a device on the dark side of the moon, that didn't look like it got there from natural causes, I think you could conclude some things about that device based on observation. So for example, if you could demonstrate that it was built to have a certain air pressure inside of it that was sustainable for organic organisms, you could conclude that someone designed that that craft, that structure, in order to have an organism survive the vacuum of space. And so in the same way, when we look at ourselves, we see that we are a vessel that is constructed for certain ends. And if you just look at what we're capable of, I think you can then deduce what we're meant for. And I think that that's a plenty decent argument.
And I think one of the things that you talked about when we first started this was about personal biases. And if we had access to an alien craft, if there was such a thing, and we were able to completely look at it and try to figure out what all this is for, I'm afraid that we'd have too much human bias in there. And we would look at that human craft and they say, okay, well, if I were to create a human craft, we'd need to find a way to survive in the vacuum of space. That must be what this part is for. We would have to find a way to evaluate what's going on in our environment so that we don't, run into an asteroid, and that must be what this part is for. We'd need some sort of recreation in there because our minds would go crazy if we were just sitting and staring at a blank wall. That must be what this part is for. But how can we apply that motivation to something that we've never heard of before? So whereas we're looking at this and saying, oh, this must be what they did, how do we actually know? And I know that you're using this as an analogy, and to bring it back to where we're coming from here, it's like, yeah, we're given certain capabilities, we're given certain senses and certain awarenesses, but how do we know what those were actually intended for? Yeah, we could probably come up with an answer. How do you know yours is the one?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And the answer for that is that you look at the evidence and you draw the best conclusion that you can based on the evidence that you have. And so for this example, and that's how I opened that's how I opened my arguments, where I said, what we're asking is, what is the best explanation for the facts that we have? Not, is this explanation so good that all explanations pan in comparison? Although I do think that. It's not, can this argument or can this conclusion get us 100% of the way there with everything else being 0%? I'm not saying that no other worldview could explain it. I'm not saying you don't look at the doohickey and go, hey, maybe this is for entertainment in the spacecraft, or maybe it's something else. Well, maybe you're right. Maybe it is something else. But if you look at all of those facts that you just mentioned, this one's for entertainment. This is for food sustenance. This is so that we can survive the vacuum of space. This looks like some kind of navigation center. If you looked at all of those in isolation, you could come up with a pretty good overarching theory that explains those facts that, hey, it looks like this was designed to get a human some kind of a carbon-based life form from there to here. And in the same way, we are justified in looking at the universe and going, wow, Earth sure looks like a little capsule that against all odds has been created and set here for for a purpose. And well, why do we know that? Because you can look at the capacities the earth gives. You can look at the capacities of human life. You can look at the capacities of human experience and deduce something farther from that. And what I see from you is, number one, you don't really have a good alternate explanation. And then number two, your standard of evidence is you have to prove it to me so conclusively that every other piece of, that every other worldview just absolutely pans in comparison. And then when I say, okay, I accept your challenge anyway, and I attempt to do that, it seems to me like the response that I'm getting is, well, I don't see it that way. And then there's really no more. And I'd like to push you a little more on that.
Okay. And the reason I'm not doing that, and you're right to call me out on that, is that in acceptance of this particular creator, in acceptance of this particular purpose, there's a whole bunch of other stuff that goes with it that I can't connect all the dots to. Does that make sense?
Maybe.
Yeah, okay. I'll give you that it is possible that we were created by an intelligent source. How do we know anything at all about the intents of this intelligent source? Now, you claim to know that, and that's fine. Whereas I look at that and I say, you know what? I can't even get to the fact that we have a creator. So why would I do all this other stuff that would be in line with what is said to be the thoughts and intentions of this creator?
Well, hold on. Right now, I'm not speaking of revelation. I'm not saying, look, you don't even know who God is, and yet, you're supposed to, take the bread and the cup or something. I'm not saying any of that. All I'm saying is you should be able to look at the world. You should be able to look at the universe and to do certain things about a supernatural reality based on that world. So, for example, you should be able to observe your capacity to do good or do evil and be able to conclude from that there is a difference between good and evil. And I think that's a very basic and easy assumption, or conclusion that you could not actually make on an atheistic worldview. And so that is one of 9 pieces of evidence that I have in order to say, look, you can look at the universe and deduce at least the fact that God exists. And if you want any more than that, I'll grant that you need special revelation. But from general revelation, just from living for however old you've lived, you should be able to conclude by deduction that a supernatural source exists. And I also, in my favorite argument, again, I think the most powerful argument that I brought up is the fact that the existence of God is a base knowledge. It's something that you can look at the world and that you live every single day. I know you, at least I know you enough to where I know you're a good person in the sense that you're thankful. You love your wife. You love your kids. If you have any, I'm pretty sure you have kids. Oh, okay. I'm sorry. But you're a person who can be thankful and who enjoys good food and who can laugh. And those things tell me that you're someone who lives life like God exists, even if you intellectually deny him.
Wow, that was a leap. And I'm not saying that there isn't. I'm sure that in your mind, you're putting that together. And where like, oh goodness, if we had another hour, we'd go right into morality, right? But that's like a whole other thing. Mark, you should just, Marlon, you should just invite us back to talk about only that and nothing else. Because
we can talk about whatever you want.
Yeah, we can talk about whatever you want about that. But it's like, yeah, you explain all these things and you say that there must be, something beyond it. And I just, even if there was something beyond it, I don't necessarily know that that's worthy of worship, rather than it just happened. Like, okay, well, does that make any sense?
Sure, but here's one reason why it would be worthy of worship. Okay. So, for example, the nature of goodness. So, okay. or just, I'll take something basic, music or flavor. I don't know if you've ever had a meal that just really hit the spot. But if you have, then you know the feeling of satisfaction and gratitude. And if you know the difference between moral right and wrong, which I'm sure that you do, you know that there's such a thing as goodness. And I think, at least classically understood, if I have my natural theology right, God is a God who's worth worshiping because of his character, because of his nature, because of his attributes. And when you see that it is good and glorious. It's not that God is some tyrant who just creates and says, okay, now you have to worship me. It's that God is so overwhelmingly good that he wants to share his goodness. And then if his creation is seeing clearly, they see in fact that God is good and deserving of worship. Does that make sense?
I see how it would make sense, but it's missing me. Does that make sense? Like I just before I got here, we went to Red Robin, and I had one of those Royal Red Robin burgers, and boy, if that didn't hit the spot. And like I know exactly what I want. I don't know why I bother to get a menu, because I just have the same thing every time. That and like 4 of those baskets of fries, right? And I always walk out of there completely satisfied. But I can explain satisfaction. Okay, I know what tastes good to me, and I know what quantity is satisfactory to me. I eat this much, and I feel just full, right? But I can explain that just based on my sense perception of it, and I don't feel the need to appeal to a supernatural source. You said, and this is a beautiful, because I wanted to talk to you about beauty. You have cats, and you love the sound that they make. I have two cats, and I'm pretty sure that they hate me as much as I hate them. All right. I do, and you and I we're gonna look at two of the same exact thing, and like you read Russian literature and you're impressed by it. I read Russian literature and wonder how someone can complain for 800 pages. You like Russian composers. I'm guessing I don't like Russian composers. I like to give them plenty of time. All right, that was my one bad Russian joke. Okay, but so even with these, you call something beauty. It's like, I don't know that the beauty is something that can be universally attested to. And even if it is, it's like saying that something is beautiful. I can't draw the dots between this is beautiful. Something must have been put in my mind or somehow for me to look at this object to say that it is beautiful. Like, I have no idea how I came up with the concept of what is beautiful. My best guess, and this is a guess, is that I have been taught to associate certain sites with this is beautiful. I'm taught through social conditioning or parental guidance or whatever. Sunsets are beautiful. Cats are beautiful. Okay, and then so whatever feeling that I have toward that, I now apply the word beautiful to it. Okay, I think of a good meal and I apply the word satisfying to it. Is it truly satisfying, like in a cosmic sense? I don't know. Like, does that make sense? Like
yeah.
So when you say this piece of music is beautiful, I listen to it and say, okay, this is based on my feelings about this, based on my reaction to it. Okay, I guess this is what beautiful music is. And I would look at something else and say this is beautiful, and you would look at that and say, wow, how can you listen to Britney Spears?
Well, I do have an answer to this,
okay.
and that's that. I'm not arguing that my taste in beauty is the objective standard. All I'm trying to point out is that if beauty exists, if you can look at the world and be satisfied by something beyond yourself, if you can eat like okay, so if you're the kind of person who can just eat like 400 nuts or something, then okay, well, fine. But if you're the kind of person who can appreciate and be thankful for food, I think that demands that you be thankful to something beyond just a higher or excuse me, you could be thankful to something beyond just like, yeah, that's just the way the world is. And I think that a godless universe creates a wonderless universe. There's no such thing as wonder on an atheistic perspective, because everything that exists simply exists, and everything that doesn't exist simply doesn't exist. And so everything is just very straightforward, deterministic, matter and molecules. You're eating food. Yeah, sure. But on a theistic perspective, it enables you to see beyond the food to something greater than the food, which is, look, sure, maybe the universe exists just for, sustenance, maybe this food exists just for sustenance, but maybe it exists also to point to something greater. And that's why something like flavor exists.
Marlon, you're always here ruining our good time, man.
Hey, man, I can let y'all go for the rest of the time, man. We ain't got no man from. I think you guys each got one more 10-minute cross-examination left. Okay. So if you guys want, man, I could just let you guys go for the rest of the.
Well, I do have a question, and I do think that the 10-minute breaks are helpful because it makes sure that we don't lose track of time, and we've been talking about nothing.
Yeah.
So Mark, is your final 10 minutes cross-examine Alex.
Okay, that sounds great. So my question for Alex is, okay, I have 5.
Yeah,
go. I need to pick one.
No, you don't need to pick one. We should do this again sometime. Seriously,
we should.
You have a podcast. I'd be happy to be on it. I have nothing. Good. I have no place to host you. Otherwise, I'd ask if we can just riff on this on a Twitch feed somewhere.
Okay, well, I'll ask you at least this one. I think this one's good. I haven't decided which one's best, but so question number 2: do you have any arguments for why atheism is true? And if not, why should your view be considered more rational than mine?
Okay, you know what? I'm going to get so much heat for this because I don't know that atheism is a view. It's just a negation of other views, right? And I guess where I'm coming from is not that atheism rules. It's more that this is what I'm going to do, and this is how I'm going to act until such times as I have reason to act for something else. Okay, like here's what, I have a car in the driveway right now, and if I was asked, do you know if it's going to start the next time you start it? The best answer I can give you is I don't know, right? I don't have any reason to believe that it won't. It started reliably the last time that it did. I can't think of anything that happened to it that would make it not start. But honestly, I don't know. But the thing is, I'm also going to live my life between now and the next time I try to start my car. I'm going to live my life as if it's going to start reliably, because until something happens, I have no reason to act otherwise. And when you ask about what is it that would make me lean atheism, that's what I would say. There is nothing that's convincing that would make me want to change my daily routine, the way I see the world, the way I evaluate moral quandaries. I don't see anything other than the position of act as if there is no God to make those choices. Does that answer your question at all?
Yes and no,
Okay.
because really, my response to that is, well, I have 9 pieces of evidence.
No.
But
you keep going back to 9 pieces of evidence, and that's great, and you do. But again, it's leading to a possibility, and you'll even admit this, that it's not leading to only one. You're leading to the best possible. And to you, it's like probabilistically, this is good enough. And
well,
to me,
I have 2 things. It corresponds to the way the world actually is, and it's internally coherent. So I do want to use those 2 tests of truth, and I think that if you use those 2 tests consistently, Christianity will give you far and away the best explanation. But you didn't quite answer the question.
Okay.
And my question again is, if you don't have any arguments for atheism, like actual arguments, rather than just, hey, these religious folks seem to disagree on a lot, I guess I'm going to sit on the bench for this one. Rather than that, if you don't have any arguments for atheism, why should atheism be considered more rational than Christianity or even Islam or any other theistic worldview?
Okay, because I can't think of anything that's been answered by Christianity or answered by Islam or answered by any other religion that we can't come up with an answer for any other way. As far as a pragmatic look at like you want to talk about morality, I prefer the meatloaf approach, where it's based on results instead of based on how close are we getting to some objective standard, where we look at, okay, we tried this is what happened, what can we do better? All right, I forget what the formal. I'm sure it's not the argument from Meatloaf, but it's the same idea, where you look at the results of whatever the action did and say, ooh, probably shouldn't do that again, or ooh, that worked, let's do that some more. So when there is nothing at all that religion supplies that says, all right, this is definitely the better way to go. And especially when there's a lot of things that you are going to be asked of me to subscribe to your God specifically, or to subscribe to Islam specifically, or to subscribe to Judaism specifically. It's not just, yeah, okay, sure, God. There's more to it, isn't there?
Well, there can be, but where I see that you're at is that you're at God doesn't exist. And and that's why I said that, because I know you're an atheist, I'm going to start with, does God exist or not? I'm not going to try to prove to you that you need to repent and believe yet, because you don't, well, first of all, because on your view, you don't have a standard of what good and evil would look like, what right or wrong behavior would look like, apart from your subjective sense, which I think is pretty good, by the way. And then farther than that, you don't have anything to believe in. Faith, biblically understood, is confidence in God's attributes. It's not believing that he exists. It's confidence that he will do what he will say he's going to do, and he is who he says he is. But you can't have faith if you don't believe that God exists, basically by definition. And so that's why I start with evidence for the existence of God. And when you say something like, well, it doesn't, I don't see the world the same way, or I don't see anything that religion can get you that, sorry, that's my phone. I don't see anything that religion can get you that atheism can't get you. I have 9 different things. I think religion can get you where the universe came from, an explanation for why it's finely tuned, a foundation for the moral truths and duties that we all live by every single day. It can give you an explanation for, it's the best explanation for why we have a conscious experience. It's the best explanation for why we're naturally thankful for the things that we get. It's the best explanation for why we see beauty all around us every single day, regardless of your taste in the beauty, by the way. It's again, the argument is not that I experience beauty and therefore something better. There could be natural explanations for why I appreciate beauty. The question is, does beauty exist? And if it does exist, then there's something more than naturalism, because naturalism can't account for beauty. It can account for your subjective interpretation of beauty. It cannot account for the fact that there's beauty actually out there in the universe. And so again, the question I think really still stands. If you can't come up with an argument, and people have tried, by the way, take the problem of evil, or a contradiction within the idea of God, like God's omnipotence. Can God create a rock so big even he can't lift it? Like, people have tried to prove that God doesn't exist, or that he can't exist, or even that atheism is more rational. But so far, all I'm hearing from you is, well, look, religion doesn't really get me anywhere. It doesn't really do anything for me personally. And so I'm just going to kind of sit on the bench. But again, that doesn't prove that your view is more rational. It just proves that you haven't been able to see the reasons, first of all. And second of all, again, I've got lots of pieces of evidence for why I think Christianity does a very good job at explaining reality. And I don't really see that you've addressed them.
Okay, so what I see then, and I guess the reason I haven't addressed them is because I'm doing my best to try to understand your position and give you as many opportunities to bring it out, rather than I refute this. Okay, but here's my big refutation, if you want to call it that. All right, is that you talk about a lot of things. You talk about beauty, and you talk about morality, and you talk about the necessary causes for the creation of the universe. You talk about the contingency thing. And that's fine, but it sounds like from over here and to a lot of people that what's happening is you're creating something that by definition fills all these roles that we don't have an understanding for how this happens. Do we have a naturalistic understanding for why we find certain things beautiful, aesthetically pleasing? It tastes great, less filling? I don't know. Do we have a sense of like what's right or what's wrong that absent every other influence, we're still going to come up with the right answer? I don't know. But it seems like you're trying to get one solution that fits all of them. Of course, it's going to be internally consistent because hey, look, I have an answer for everything. Whereas it might not necessarily be. And where I think of as you know, you say, what am I doing with my atheism? I'm not saying that atheism is anything other than saying until we actually know what that is, let's not hang our hat on it. Let's not make any decisions based on an I'm not quite sure yet. Let's not base it. You say you give 9, and that's fine. But even all those 9, first of all, by themselves don't get you there. And even all together, what it sounds like you're trying to come up with a composite answer to answer all those, even though the answer might be very separate things. Okay, like I have different things in my house that fulfill different purposes. I have something in my house that controls the air temperature, the water temperature, the amount of airflow that comes in and out of the windows. I have a whole bunch of other things that do that. And it's not any one thing that's doing that. So when you say, okay, I'm gonna, we need to create the universe, we need a basis for morality, we need something, rather than saying, I have this one object, by definition, it fits all of them. I can't wrap my mind around that and then applying attributes to this or applying characteristics to it and then applying intention to it and then applying what am I supposed to do with my daily life to feed into this. So that's where it stops being a rational position for me. Not just, is it possible that all this happened and that there is a creator and that there's a source? Okay, even if there is that, why does this necessitate my tithing?
Yeah, well, it definitely wouldn't necessitate your tithing. Tithing is for believers. It's not.
I just used that as an example. I think
okay,
where I was going.
Yeah, fair enough. Sorry, I don't mean to get cut off on a side tangent. I'm just saying God doesn't want your money. He doesn't care. He has all the wealth in the universe. He invented wealth. He doesn't need money. But the reason that Christianity can be a rational position over against atheism is because, again, it's not that we have a God and go, how can we make God make sense? Oh, I know. Here's one good explanation for everything, and it's just kind of like, well, what about this? Well, God did it. What about this? Oh, look, God. How's this happen? Oh, look, God. That's kind of a God of the gaps argument, and I wouldn't make that at all. My argument is that we can look at individual facts and go, what is the explanation of this? And like you said, I was thinking about one of your objections that the theistic proofs get you up to 4 gods, right? Because you could have a God of morality, a God of design, a God of power, a God of whatever. But that is not the simplest explanation that we could come up with. And so when we look at those things, we go, well, wait a second, how can you have power if you don't have any knowledge? That doesn't make any sense. You can't create anything if you don't have any knowledge. You can't, in the same way, works the other way around. So with all the theistic proofs, or with any of my 9 arguments, it's not that I've got this nice little religion and then I go, oh, look, by the way, God fits really well into all these other things. No, it's not that at all. It's that, at least not from the rational perspective. From the rational perspective, it's that we see all these phenomena in the universe, and the best, simplest explanation is that Christianity is actually true. And to be clear, I think that's why special revelation actually becomes to play such a critical role. I didn't grow up, and when I was 5 years old, my mom sat me down and was like, time to teach the Kalam cosmological argument. No, that's not how it worked. We learn scripture, and then it turns out that scripture conforms not only perfectly, but overwhelmingly beautifully within the entire universe, and is such that no other worldview could even come close to matching the coherence or the correspondence theory of truth.
All right, that's 10 minutes, Mark. All right,
Thank
Alex, you got your final 10 minutes.
Okay, let's talk about morality.
That sounds good.
Just because, like the we have 10 minutes to talk about this, and Marlon's going to come in and say, "Okay, kids, it's time for your question." And we could riff on this, and I think you and I did riff on this for like hours at one point, right?
We did.
Okay. And when it so I have two like morality meta questions here to ask.
Sure.
Never mind the specifics about you should do this or you shouldn't do that.
Of course.
Let's do a real thought experiment here.
Okay.
Because I have this weird idea that what we come up with our morality is more based on what we experience as we interact with society, right? Like I could not tell you. I could tell you. And my sister's listening. I just saw her in chat, so don't listen to this, Athena. But when I first got the 10 Commandments on a Little Precious Moments Bible, I saw that commandment that says, "Thou shalt not commit adultery." And boy, howdy, if 70-year-old Alex had no idea what that even means, right? So what do? I go over to mom and dad and I say, "Hey, what's adultery?" Right? Like I had to be explained what this even is and then why it's wrong. And it occurs to me that I don't know like the exact moment when I figured out murder is wrong. I don't know at the exact moment that I figured out, you know what, bullying is wrong. I could not say that. And because I could not say that, I couldn't tell you definitively that it's just here. That it just came from somewhere within me, and it's just something that I understood. So I propose an experiment, because the only way we're going to find this out is if we take a large portion of people, say 2,000, and from the second they are born, we remove them of all social influences whatsoever. The only thing they ever encounter is that group of 2,000 people, right? And if we isolated everything from these 2,000 people, do you think they're going to come up with the divine standard of objective morality?
No.
Okay.
I mean, well, yes and no. If you did that, I think the 2,000 people would kill each other very quickly. I think socialization is necessary in order to promote longevity and good morals. However, I want to make a distinction very early in this conversation. Mm-hmm. We have to make a distinction between the epistemological conversation about how we know right and wrong and the ontological conversation about whether there is such a thing as right and wrong. And so from the Christian perspective, what I'm trying to argue is that ontologically, ethics actually exists, meaning beyond, like, regardless of whether we disagree or agree, regardless of how we know it, the question is there such a thing as right and wrong? And so I see atheists, and not just atheists, I don't mean to talk like that. I see people in these conversations hit these roadblocks all the time, where the atheist says, look, Christopher Hitchens' classic thing, I name one good thing that I can do, or that you can do that I can't do. It's like, you're completely missing the point. The point is there such a thing as a good thing or not? And when you say that, do you mean, well, there are things that further our genes, there are things that is good for society, is good for culture? It's like, no, you just used the word good 2 or 3 times. I'm asking you what that is and if it actually exists. And so when we have this conversation about whether good and evil actually exists, that's the point that's important for the argument. Because if you can demonstrate that good actually exists, you need a grounding for that that's beyond human beings, beyond just our ideas. You need a grounding for that is, dare I say, supernatural.
And then now this is another thing. Oh goodness, I'm glad you brought that up, because I'd forgotten all about it. Grounding, right? Yeah. What does it mean? Can you do this whole thing where you explain it to me like I'm 5? All right. What do you mean when you say something has to be grounded?
Sure. So when something has to be grounded, basically the explanation for that word, the definition of that word, is to mean that it has to have adequate reasons to exist in reality. And so, for example, the theory of gravity, that could only be grounded if it matched our experience, if it actually existed in the world. And so when we're talking about something that is by definition metaphysical, we have to talk about it like, does it exist or not? And if it exists, then the fact that it exists is the grounding of it. So for example, you can't just say to yourself, well, I'm going to be good. And it's like, well, what do you mean by good? Well, I mean that I'm going to obey the 10 commandments. Okay, well, are those 10 commandments actually good things? And if you say yes, then you have to ground that somehow. So, for example, in a Christian worldview, I would say the nature of God is the grounding of morality. While in an atheistic worldview, you don't have a metaphysical grounding for good and evil. You have to come up with a naturalistic one for good and evil. And so grounding might also be another way of saying, what's your explanation for why it exists? What's your explanation for what it is as a property, considering that you cannot touch, feel, see, taste, access it with your senses? Does that make sense?
Oh yeah, but that explanation does make sense for a number of things. But I still like there are some things that you claim that you have a grounding for that like I fail to see why it needs a grounding. Does that make sense? Like when you talk about morality, it seems like the kind of thing that you can figure out if the right thing is being done or not done based on results, rather than based on how well it conforms to some prior standard.
Okay, that's good. That's a good question. If you allow me to cut in, the question is results according to whom? And the results according to Joseph Stalin is, I want my state to be the most powerful state I can come up with. And his results were pretty good for a pretty long time. And so the question is, are his methods better or worse? And when you say better or worse, the question has to be, do you actually mean it conforms to something beyond just opinions? Because if it's your opinion versus Joseph Stalin's opinion, I guess you guys get to arm wrestle or have a world war over it. But if it's no, that these things such as good, right and wrong, good and evil actually exist in the universe, then there's something beyond ourselves that we actually have to that we first of all can recognize epistemologically, and we actually have to conform to ontologically. Does that make sense?
The secular humanist perspective then would be to say, yeah, it's like, yeah, it's true that you can never be able to tell the full extent of the consequence of any one action you take. There's too many variables and too many people involved, right? You could say that you're acting for some good of this particular whatever, but you're absolutely right in saying that there's no way to say if it is for the absolute best good ever. We go by, like I go by the immediate results that I see. That's all I've got. Right. And it gets me to a place where I can make myself a better person, and the people who I can influence, it will affect it in that direction too. Okay. Now, when I think of appealing to some other objective sense of whatever morality is out there, I can't even look at that morality and say for sure, is that working toward my best interest and the best interest of the people who I immediately surround myself with? And if it doesn't, then why would I follow a morality that has no benefit to me?
Okay, so notice, and this is the question of your grounding, or this is the answer to your grounding question. You have grounded your morality in pragmatism, in utilitarianism. That's your grounding. So you say, why should I be good? The answer is because, or what is good? Excuse me. The question is, what is good? And your answer is, presumably, whatever provides the most amount of good for the most amount of people. That would be kind of a classic humanitarian, secularist understanding of the grounding of morality. It's the most amount of good for the most amount of people. However, the question is, what defines good? And that is going to be a huge problem for the atheists and the secularists, because they literally have to either invent it. And when they invent it, I literally mean they have to make it up and they have to pretend like it's true. There's no real objective reason in the universe why murdering your neighbor is better than eating your neighbor, but we're going to pretend like it's true. And in order to justify our pretending, we're going to say, hey, if everyone ate their neighbors, you might be eaten, right? And that's just not a very good grounding for morality at all. And I think not only history can bear this out, but just pure logic can bear this out. If you look at morality systems that are based on utilitarian ethics, they don't actually work. For example, it might be great utility to kill everyone as soon as they reach 80 years old, and to enslave every 10th child that's born. That might be great utility, providing the most amount of good for the most amount of people. But that obviously contradicts our basic moral sense. And the reason for that is because there actually is a such thing as a good that's out there in the universe, a feature of reality that ontologically exists, that we know epistemologically from other means. And utilitarian ethics or humanitarian ethics are just not going to get you there. Excuse me, humanist ethics are just not going to get you there, because they're fabricated. The grounding just doesn't hold up. And people realize that immediately as soon as they start thinking about it for more than 15 minutes and for more like 15 months, as demonstrated by Dostoevsky's novels and the Soviet Union in general as a historical experiment.
Oh, I'm sorry. I still haven't made it through the Metamorphosis. I know you keep on talking about Russian literature, but I haven't gotten around to it yet. And I know the joke there is that Metamorphosis wasn't written by, that was one of those things where I'm trying to be funny by showing that never mind. Anyway, no, like I get where you're coming from on one sense, but I guess the other part of that is like, even if there is some objective morality floating out there, how are we getting any closer to it? How do we know if we're getting closer to it?
Well,
like if there is something that you're talking about where there is this sense of this is just what is right.
Mm-hmm. Well, to be clear, you're making an epistemological question, and the question that I'm asking you is an ontological one. However, since you asked the epistemological question of how we know, I'll go ahead and tell you.
Yeah.
My worldview permits me to have a natural theology that says we know the character of God, and the character of God is loving and just and righteous. And so based on those loving, just, righteous, based on those attributes, we can then deduce and infer emotionally what the good and the just and the righteous is. And so we know it every single day. And I do think that even children have a base sense of right and wrong, even though they're bent towards evil. They know the difference between right and wrong. All of us know the difference between right and wrong. And that's an epistemological answer. The question ontologically is whether or not they are right, whether or not we are right in that there's a distinction between right and wrong. Because on an atheist view, there's no such thing as right and wrong. Lions eat lambs sometimes. That's just how the universe is. Sometimes people murder someone else. That's how the universe is. That's how you get Dostoevsky's famous line, if God does not exist, anything is permissible. What he means by that is there are no rules. Everything is just a fabrication. That's Nietzsche's claim that morality is literally a construct that we use in order to justify our behavior, our weakness, as a matter of fact.
All right, man. I popped in, man. Popped in on y'all. All right, so that's the final 10 minutes. Thank you guys for that great conversation.
Thank you.
All right, so now we're gonna move into the closing statements, and then after that we got a couple questions. So we'll go to a Q&A. So everyone out there, if you have a question, get them in. All right. So Mark, go ahead and give a quick closing statement.
Thank you very much. So my aim this evening has been to demonstrate that Christianity is a reasonable worldview and a beautiful worldview. That's really, hopefully, Lord willing, is going to be the aim of my life. It's definitely the aim of Well-Read Christian. And I hope that I've been able to demonstrate that effectively in tonight's debate. Again, that Christianity is reasonable and that it's beautiful. And I really do believe that the cosmological argument, the teleological argument, the meta-ethical argument for God's existence provide sufficient evidence that you can deduce a higher power. And as soon as you have a higher power, all sorts of things make all sorts of sense. So, for example, the fact that there is something instead of nothing makes a lot of sense. The fact that the universe has been intricately and finely tuned for our existence, not because we are so great and we are the end result, but because God is so great and he has created out of his goodness and he wants to share his good nature with us. And that is a profoundly good and beautiful thing. And then, of course, it makes sense of other aspects of reality that we engage with. For example, we see art in the universe all the time. I don't imagine there's a single one of us listening right now who has never gone for a walk or been for a hike and seen the beauty of the universe. And I really don't think you can make sense of that on an atheistic worldview. If you looked at the universe on an atheistic worldview, it's like, yeah, this is the way it is. And if you looked on it on a Christian worldview, you can say, this is the way that God has made it. And I think there's a wonder and an awe to that. The curiosity of human beings on a naturalistic explanation is just a tool for procreation. I think it's very crude. I think our natural propensity for creativity, as well as exploration and curiosity, can all be explained, and beautifully explained, captivatingly explained, by the fact that God has created and created us in his own image, and that is reflected in the universe. It's reflected in our ability to reason, to communicate, to have all of these sorts of things that really doesn't actually make sense on an atheistic worldview. Same with our purpose. Human beings, we're driven by a purpose. We know that we're here for a reason. We know that humanity is here for a reason. We get up every single day and we live our lives as if it makes sense, as if there's a grander purpose. And if we didn't, we would live sporadically. We would live for the thrill of the moment. And I just don't think that that's sustainable. And so each of us live out a Christian worldview just in our daily lives without even explicitly acknowledging it. And as soon as you start to talk about the way the world is, I think it just becomes very, very clear. If you're talking about reason, if that's the conversation that we're trying to have, if we're talking about what is the best explanation for the world, I think Christianity more than has sufficient evidence and explanatory power in order to justify the Christian worldview. And so I could conclude with the same words as Robert Jastrow. He's the astrophysicist that I quoted earlier. In his book, God and the Astronomers, it ends like this, quote, "For the scientist who has lived by his faith in the power of reason, the story ends like a bad dream. He has scaled the mountains of ignorance. He is about to conquer the highest peak. And as he pulls himself over the final rock, he is greeted by a band of theologians who have been sitting there for centuries, end quote. I don't want to mischaracterize that. He's talking about specifically the origin of the universe and how it looks like the universe was created in some sort of a creation event. He's an agnostic. He doesn't necessarily mean to have religious overtones, but of course he does in a sense, because he's saying that religious people for all time have said that there's a beginning to the universe and that God caused it. And atheists only recently in the last 100 years or so have had to face that reality in a chilling way. However, I really want to close like this, not like that. I want to close by saying that I am not convinced that human beings believe things based on facts. There's just too much evidence to the contrary. I think human beings believe things because they're drawn for other reasons, namely beauty. I think people look at the universe and they believe exactly what they want to believe. And therefore, I think that there's actually good reason to look at the universe and say Christianity is true because the facts correspond to it, the facts are coherent, and because it's a beautiful worldview that will leave you existentially satisfied. It's one that fulfills our deepest intuitions about the way the world is. We know that we are fundamentally broken, that we are capable of so much more, but that wrongdoing and evil in the world holds us back. And we know that we need forgiveness, that we need something more than just to sweep it under the rug and pretend like everything's fine and try to do a little bit better. We need something more than that. And I think that Christianity really resonates with the way that human beings really are. And that's why that it is that's why it's such a cross-cultural religion. It's a religion that has been found all over the world and is spread to every culture. It's the only religion that doesn't really focus on one primary group. And I know evangelicalism has been cast as kind of the white man's religion. I know Marlon had a debate about that, and that was good, but it's really not. I mean, there are more Asian Christians than American Christians, and that really says something, considering that originally it was a Jewish religion. So I really do think that Christianity is beautiful and it's reasonable, and I think it's definitely more beautiful and reasonable than atheism. And again, my most powerful argument is not only the experience of beauty, but the reality of beauty and the basic belief that human beings have a purpose and that our actions have meaning and that our lives are significant and that we experience that and live like it every single day is far more convincing than the cosmological argument or the teleological argument, even though those arguments or any other arguments that I've used and I think are absolutely rock solid. And so I just want to thank Alex so much. I think this has been a really fun conversation. I've enjoyed it so much. I hope it's not the last one. And I definitely want to thank Marlon for having me on. And I hope it's not the last time I'm on either. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Thank you. All right, Alex, you got it for a closing statement.
You know, in preparing for this, I thought out what I would want to talk about in opening. I thought about what I would want to ask Mark during our cross-examination. I put absolutely no thought at all to my closing. And I think I would have to say, though, that my purpose of this whole thing, rather than like, okay, I'm not going to be the best person to present an atheist point of view. I don't even think there is such thing as an atheist point of view, because it's just one topic. It's one claim about one thing. So don't take anything that I say as anything more than just I'm trying to say why I personally am not Christian. All right, I speak for nobody else. I speak only for myself. And as for myself, for why I'm not Christian, is unchanged. And this isn't the fault of Mark, or this isn't the fault of anybody else, but I hear this is the best explanation that we have, but we still can't say if it's the right one. And it's not so much that I can look at that and say, yeah, this is the best explanation, because in accepting that as the best explanation, there's a lot of other stuff that comes with it. All right, there's a lot of baggage that comes along with Christianity, other than just saying, yeah, we have a creator. Yeah, the world is beautiful. Yeah, evolution was guided, or any other claims that a God can make, because it's going to necessitate some actions afterwards. All right, it's not about accepting the simple propositions. There's more to it. Now, my goal in this whole thing was I wanted. Mark is a great guy, and I've had a lot of fun talking to him over the past few months. We've had conversations on phone, on message. It's great. I'm not here to put silver bullets in the holes of Christianity. I'm here to say the evidence that they give for accepting this proposition, for me and for a lot of people, is insufficient. And when you can say that there are arguments The logical arguments are there. They're incomplete. Any logical arguments are going to be illogically put together, or it leads to a conclusion that doesn't actually include the Christian God, or is an argument for ignorance, like, hey, we can't come up with any other reason for this. It must be something that is X, Y, and Z, therefore. Okay, I can't back that up. And if you want to talk about reason, this is one of those weird cases, and there's so many of these where we're looking at the same pieces of evidence. Some people are going to decide to lean one way, and some people are going to lean another way. And where every single one of us can rationalize and justify why we've gotten to where we are. And maybe we're talking past each other, and maybe we're offering evidences that are compelling to one, and the other person is just shaking their head saying, why is this here? But the reason I wanted to have this conversation with Mark is not to come up with any solutions, but to show, hey, there's a reasonable way to talk about this. There's a way for people who have different beliefs can still talk in a well-intentioned, in a well-mannered way, communicate ideas. And even though we're going to walk away from this disagreeing, we're going to walk away from this shaking hands and probably having a conversation about this elsewhere. And Mark, I would be happy to have that conversation with you, either on your podcast, or heck, I'll start a YouTube channel if that's what it takes. We have so much more to talk about, and we're able to talk about it in a way that is productive and in a way that shows respect for each other, even though we're not coming up with the same conclusions. So thank you very much, Mark, for coming on here with me. And thank you, Marlon, for bringing us together and putting on this great show for us.
All right. Thank you both, fellas, for coming on and doing a debate. It's a great conversation. As always, with my guests, I always want to hand out gifts. I'm a gift-giving individual, so I like to give gifts to those who come on and volunteer their time to come on and debate different subject matters. So I'll be reaching out to you after this show ends to get information, contact information, to get that gift to you guys. But with that said, let's get to some questions. We have some questions here. Let me see. I think we got a question for Mark. Mark, with which question should I start? I think you meant to put is a kalam, the teleological objective morality, the transcendental argument, longing for purpose, or explaining goodness?
I don't understand the question. With which question should I start? What exactly is he asking? Do you have any idea?
My best guess is like he has a number of things that he wants to say about all of those and wants to know where you want to go.
Oh, gotcha. Well, if you and I were to debate, I would be happy to talk about all of them. So start from the top.
He just had a debate on this channel, didn't he, Marlon? A couple weeks ago?
He had, I think it was 2 episodes ago, I believe he was on here. So any thoughts on that, Alex?
You know what? They all the kalam, the teleological, and in fact, in my opening notes, I have that KCA, LCA, and all that, and it just seems to be inconclusive to me. And whether even if you grant every single one of the premises on all those, it still doesn't take you to Christianity.
Well, I would agree that it doesn't take you to Christianity. I think it takes you to God.
Mm-hmm. It takes you to something. See, I don't even know if we can apply the God label to it. It has to be something, even if all those are true, it's something beyond our comprehension.
Well,
but
right. And that thing that's beyond our comprehension, I'm assigning a label. Mm-hmm. And so just to be clear, I'm not saying, well, God fits these things. I'm saying, no. What word can we use to describe something that fits all of these attributes? And then I'm using that term. Does that make sense? It's not that I'm shoving God into the arguments. It's that I'm looking at the universe. It's that I'm looking at these arguments and I'm seeing what thing could fulfill an explanation for all of these things. And I'm calling that God. If we were being super technical, we call it a maximally great being. That's the philosophical term for God.
Yeah, that's step 4 and 5 in Craig's version of the KCA, right?
Right, exactly. So, that just sounds stingy to me. But
all right, next question from Rayo again. Mark, if all religions have a truth claim, how can the transcendental argument for a God account for a God that requires a rapist paid to their victim?
Okay, if all religions have a truth claim, I'm not sure what he means by that. I think all religions claim to be true, if that's what he means. I agree. How can the transcendental argument for a God account for a God that requires a rapist to pay for their own victim? So I think this is probably an allusion to Old Testament law. I think it's probably a gross mischaracterization of it, but I don't see a connection between the transcendental argument and any particular ethical question that could be raised from any particular account in the Old Testament. I think the transcendental argument, or the Spinoza argument, the fact that logic exists and that there are multiple minds that could have an intelligent conversation, I think that gets you the supernatural claim that there is something beyond ourselves. There's something beyond the natural world that could explain those phenomena. And I definitely don't see a connection between the transcendental argument or any random ethical theory that you could draw or not draw from Scripture.
All right. Any thoughts on that, Alex?
I'm going to let this one go. I'm not sure I can really follow what the question is going, so I'm not going to try to put any application, anything on it.
Okay.
I'm not sure I understand the question, so we'll move on.
All right, next question. Mark, you mentioned in the cross-examination that proof of your argument exists in the fact that we have an quote-unquote X factor as people that goes beyond social contract. Or point to a number 3, finish it up. Compass. Moral compass. How do you explain those people who lack the X factor, i.e., the existence of let me get that out. Psychopathy, a psycho basically, is the best example for the missing X factor of or lack the moral compass. I think of it as moment, but I'm sure there are others. Such a long-winded question. My goodness.
Wow. Okay. Well, I think the question is this. This is the question that I'm going to answer. I'm going to answer this. If there is such a thing as an objective ontological moral truth that of values and duties that each human being should be able to understand basically, then how can you explain people who don't have that? Either people who come up with their own morality or people who just don't see a reason to care for other human beings, like psychopaths. And I actually think that the existence of a psychopath really confirms my point of view, because when you look at a psychopath, you literally call them a psychopath. We literally have a label for someone who doesn't see the world the way everyone else sees it. And so I think the existence of a psychopath very clearly demonstrates the fact that there are moral laws that this person, by some disorder, is not able to see accurately or normally. However, again, that proves the rule. It's an exception that proves the rule is what I'm really trying to say.
Okay, Alex, any thoughts?
I actually like Ari's question because one other thing that I don't think this is our actual point, but another thing that you can get from this is the changes in a person's ability to process information or to make decisions, moral decisions especially, can be traced to trauma to the brain, right? You can cut my finger off, you can cut my leg off, and other than maybe I don't want to do the same thing that cut my finger off, and maybe I might wish some harm on the person who cut my leg off, it's not going to make a serious dent in the way I process information, the way that I make moral choices. Okay, so this actually, to me, it looks like it leans toward the naturalistic material side, that you affect the brain and nothing else, and that changes the way you make and evaluate moral decisions.
Well, even if that's true, that doesn't disprove the fact that ontologically, again, that's an epistemological question. Maybe certain brains figure certain moral equations and come up with different answers. I'll grant that, absolutely. But that doesn't change the fact that if morality exists beyond ourselves, then it's something that exists in an ontological sense, almost in a Platonic sense. It's something that actually is out there, in which case there are right and wrong answers to moral questions. That's my only project with this conversation, is to prove that there are right and wrong answers to moral questions. And on the atheistic view, you have to come up with either social contract theory or evolutionary biology in order to say, well, there aren't really answers to moral questions, but there are answers that we can pretend are the case. We can pretend that they're true in order to have a functional society. And I'm arguing, no, they actually are true. And every day we live like it's true. Does that make sense?
All right. And we have 2 more questions. Question for Mark. Aside from fear, why would you want to worship a God that punishes people infinitely for finite crimes?
That's an interesting question. Well, a couple things. First of all, it's entirely possible that I don't know if I want to answer that direction. Here's what I'll say. A God who's infinitely great could hypothetically be completely justified in punishing infinitely for crimes. So it's not the fact that the crimes are finite. It's the fact that the person who is being offended by the moral crimes is infinite. And so therefore that crime, which is done to harm an infinitely great person, would deserve an infinitely great punishment. So that's the rationale for that. But again, you don't actually have any grounding to say that God is unjust for anything that he does, because you need a standard of justice in order to do that. And I would really challenge you to come up with a standard of justice beyond, well, I just don't like that, because that's ultimately what you're going to get. You're going to get, really, God would do that? And I'd say, well, sure, maybe. God is the standard of justice with which we use to measure. And so, number one, I do absolutely have faith and trust that God will do the right thing, whatever that looks like. And number two, I trust that I would not be able to come up with a standard of justice in order to question God. And I would seriously challenge you by saying that I don't think you could either.
All right, Alex, any thoughts?
Yeah, I'm going to give the argument from Meatloaf here, where like you can have this is meatloaf. This is the recipe for meatloaf, and anything else is going to be substandard meatloaf, and that's fine. But what if this particular group of people doesn't like onions? And for this group of people, they're going to be just fine living in a meatloaf society where there are no onions in their meatloaf. Now, is this textbook, by the book morality? No, but it's going to have positive results for that group of people. Is it going to have net positive results going through generations? I don't know. And I argue that we probably can't know. Okay, so when we look at a standard like, why would we want to worship a God that punished people infinitely for finite crimes? This is our version of meatloaf. Okay, we can't think of any crime that is so bad that it requires an infinite punishment. And by saying, you know what, there's something out there that could possibly justify that, and if it does, then you're in the wrong. I would look at that and say, yeah, okay, maybe you created it, but I still don't want onions in my meatloaf. And just because it's your standard doesn't really mean it applies to us.
Yeah, yeah, I'd agree. And in the same way, I assume the questioner is an atheist, in which case they really don't have a standard to say. Really, here's this questioner's objection. What they're saying is, I don't really like that. That's what they're saying. I don't really like what God has said that he's going to do, or something that God has done. And I imagine there are a lot of atheists who say, well, look at the Old Testament. God has done some atrocious things. To which my response is, how do you know they're awful things? You can only know that they're actually awful things if there's such a thing as a standard of good and evil that can differentiate between right and wrong. And you can only ever get that standard if there's something beyond you. Otherwise, your objection boils down to, I don't really like meatloaf. I don't really like broccoli. Well, that's not an argument against God.
Okay.
All right. And our final question of the night, Alex and Mark, what is your purpose in living, and what do you think happens when you die?
And finally, I get one. It's like this is supposed to. I felt like I was jumping into the viper's nest here, where I'm going to have all sorts of these coming at me with all these questions, like how do you?
I thought so too.
but finally, no, I get the good one. I get what's my purpose in living, right? Okay.
And a lot more atheists subscribe to the channel. You'll be really surprised.
No. I think that's great, and show that we can have these conversations, and we can have it in a civil way and in a productive way. Okay, but purpose. Goodness, Mark, if I didn't want to eventually ask you about purpose, this is we could talk for hours about this. My purpose in living is to learn more. Because Mark and I, we look at this universe and we see something beautiful and wondrous. Okay, and it just makes me want to look more into it. And it especially makes me look at like what is beautiful, even like if you've ever heard about something called the Julia set. It's a graphic image that's put on the complex plane of numbers, and I could go into the technical, but it's gorgeous. It's absolutely gorgeous, and it's all done strictly by numbers, by human conventions of something called that we have to make up imaginary numbers, right? And it creates beauty. It creates a fractal progression of something that I can't even explain. Look it up if you want to. The Julia set. And there's so many things like this. There's so many little elements of beauty that you don't have to apply a supernatural anything to. That you could look at something and say, wow, architecture has changed so much in the past 500 years. Let's try to figure out what got it there. And that there is this gorgeous world to explore. We're going to go Lion King here. There is more to see than can ever be seen, and more to do than can ever be done. And I want to experience and learn about as much of it as possible. As far as what do I think happens when we die, this is your usual atheistic, I don't know. But since I've never gotten a postcard saying, hey, sure, it's hot down here, I'm not going to make any decisions based on what might happen after that until I have reason to. So my best answer, I don't know.
Well, regarding your answer to what is your purpose in living, I just have to say, spoken like a true person bearing the image of God. But for my own answer, my purpose in living, that's a good question. I'm not so sure that I know. I'm not so sure that anyone knows. But if you're asking what my subjective understanding or my subjective idea of what my purpose is that I think I was literally created to see God. I think I was created, and I think everyone has this, The Westminster Confession basically gets it right. We're created to know God and enjoy him forever. And I think that that's what all creation is meant to do. And so, and I think that every human being will see God and know God. And yeah, that's basically it. And what happens when you die? That's the other side of the question. Well, I mean, I take my theology from scripture, from Bible. And so I think that when you die, you face judgment from God for your moral behavior. And so since God is just, he will judge justly. And if you've done evil, then you'll be punished for your evil. And if you've done good, then you'll go to heaven. However, scripture also teaches that no one has done good, and that everyone is in for some pretty bad news when they die. And so the catch is that Jesus can pay for your moral crimes if you repent and believe in him. So I would like to think that I've repented and believed in him. And so therefore I'm confident that I'll be rescued from my own evil nature.
All right. That concludes the Q&A portion.
I just have to apologize, Mark. I was smiling not because of mockery to what you said. I just noticed my sister was in chat.
Oh,
so
no.
I had to give her a half finger heart.
That's totally okay. And if I've ever smiled while you were talking, please, it was not in mockery, I promise.
Okay. As long as you know.
Yeah, I see your sister commenting, so I thought I recognize the last name. I said that must be a sister. So good stuff. Now, fellas, I thank you guys for coming on. I really do appreciate you too. And as I said, I'll be contacting you to get your where you want me to mail your gift to. And I appreciate you guys, and hope we can do this again sometime.
Yeah, I agree.
Thank you, Marlon.
All right. Well, folks, that is it for tonight's episode of The Gospel of Truth. We had another exciting debate, and we have more debates in the future, so be on the lookout. Once again, thank you for Alex and Mark coming on and debating this subject, why I am and why I am not a Christian. And there's a lovely discussion. I hope this starts causing people to think about their positions now, because that is the goal, right? We don't have these civil conversations in order to just have conversations, not on the gospel of truth. The whole idea is to preach the gospel in a matter of intellectual discussion, and if that's not being done, then I need to shut down the show and not do it no more. That is the goal of the gospel of truth. And I really do desire for those who don't know Christ to come to Christ. I desire Alex. Alex knows my position, and he's very aware that I really do desire him to come to Christ. And there are plenty of people out there who are watching this show and who will watch this show in the future, and that I desire, and Mark and I desire together, for you to come to Christ. Christ bled, died, and resurrected on the third day in order to give life, eternal life, to those who believe in him. And it's important that you understand that foundational core aspect of the Christian faith. So come to Christ. God is tugging on your heart. Come to Christ. Repent of your sins and come to Christ. That is a gospel message. But with that said, I'm going to get out of here. It is late night over here, and it is really late on the East Coast, if anybody's on the East Coast. So we're going to conclude this. And once again, thank you for joining me. May God bless you, and may God keep you. I'm gone.